Today we're going to talk about color theory and colors and color systems and kind of get our feet wet with that. Our exercise today is actually fairly short, so it'll give you a little time to catch up on some of the other stuff, some of your assignments. But we'll be dealing with creating swatches in, actually we'll be working in Photoshop and in Illustrator today. So I'll walk you through that. The other part of today is that I'm going to get you prepped for your Charlie Harper project that's coming up. So you guys got that handout, and we'll go through some examples. You're actually going to do some searching online to find an example to base your work on, and so we'll go from there after I get done talking about the color theory part. So we're going to start first with colors and color theory. Some of this is a throwback to when you used to play with paints. Maybe you still get the opportunity to play with paints, where you're mixing colors, and so some of this should be self-explanatory, but we're going to go through it anyway. So I'm going to start with the color wheel, and essentially we start with our primary colors, our red, our blue, and our yellow. And in the world of this color wheel, the secondary colors are essentially what would happen if we mixed the primary colors. So if we took yellow and we had blue and we mixed the two together, we get a secondary color of green. So you guys remember this when you used to mix paints like in elementary school, right? So once we mix the primary color with the secondary color, we get a tertiary color, and etc. You can keep going, keep mixing, and you get the variance in between. And so this is a relationship between all of these colors. Complementary colors, colors that inherently complement each other or pair nicely together, are colors that are directly opposite each other on that color wheel. So if, for example, we had yellow, a great complement to yellow would be purple. Orange would have a great complement that would be blue. So we're just looking at that color wheel and going directly across it to find a nice complementary color to it. Analogous colors, on the other hand, are colors that are similar. They're right next to each other on the color wheel. They tend to match each other really well, but not stand out against one another. So they're kind of a field that work nicely together as a group of colors. We'll talk for a little bit about color systems as well. And I've already touched on this a little bit in class. We've talked about it. You've picked a few options occasionally. But now hopefully it'll make a little bit more sense. There's two primary color systems that we work in on computers. One is called RGB, and the other one is called CMYK. And there's a distinct difference between the two. So an RGB system is produced with light and by mixing light. So it's, you could call it an additive system. So we take a light, we shine it, and there used to be a great exhibit at the Exploratorium. They've since taken it down, where you could see this in effect. But essentially, if we turned on a green light, we'd see green. If we turned on a green light and a red light, where the two of those lights would overlap, we'd get yellow. If we turned on a green light, a red light, and a blue light, where all three of those overlap, we'd get white light. And so that the way a projector works, the way that a computer screen works, is essentially have a series of little dots that are red, green, and blue. And when they turn on in various combinations, they produce all of these colors for us. So it's about light. So an RGB system is fundamentally about something that you're projecting or something that you're seeing on a screen. So if we're designing, say, a website, we would want to be working in the RGB color space because it's going to be seen on a computer monitor. If, on the other hand, we're designing something to be printed, we want to work in a printing color space. And so this is very different. So remember, the first one had to do with light shining. In this system, it's actually about reflection. So the easiest way to think about the CMYK system is the toner that goes into a color laser printer. There's 4 toners that go into a color laser printer that make up whatever it is that we print out of it. There's a cyan, that blue color, a magenta, a yellow, CMY, and then key, which is black. So technically speaking, if we took cyan, magenta, and yellow and we mixed all 3 of those toners together, we'd end up getting kind of a really dark gray. It's not a true black. So on a color laser printer, we add the K, the black. We add true black to give us a nice black. So the way that this system works is essentially, if I had a piece of paper and I ran it through the printer, and the color that I was printing was just cyan. It's just that blue color. When it came out of the printer and I set it down on the desk, there's light that comes down and shines onto that piece of paper. That color, that pigment, is absorbing all other colors, all other wavelengths of light except the cyan, which is bouncing back at us. So the cyan color is what we see because that's what's bouncing back toward us. So it's about absorption of other light spectrums that give us the color. So it's distinctly different than the additive color system of a monitor, where we're projecting light. So in this scenario, if I printed cyan and magenta together on a page, they would be reflecting the cyan and the magenta wavelengths, which our eyes would perceive as blue when the two are mixed. So it's a different system. So whenever we're going to be designing something to print, where the primary objective would be printing, say, the lecture series poster, for example, the Charlie Harper, for example, the color space that we should be working in is the CMYK color space. Now the great question here is, well, wait a minute, why does it make any difference? And the truth is, for your purposes, it really doesn't make that much of a difference. If you're doing your work and you're designing it, the computers are pretty good at changing from one color system to the other. So let's say you did your Charlie Harper work in an RGB system. And then you said, okay, well, I need to go print it. The printer, or the computer, would convert to the CMYK and send it to the printer. That's fine. The problem here comes with the accuracy of the colors. If we were really concerned with getting the exact color that was on the monitor matching with the exact color that came out of the printer, in that scenario, these color spaces would really start to matter. And we want to pay much more careful attention. I've asked for a long time as part of this class to actually calibrate monitors to printers. There is a way of doing that where what you see on the monitor is exactly what's going to come out of a specific printer. And you can use color profiles to get that. We unfortunately don't have the technology or the sophistication at this level to do that. If you were in a professional print shop, you would do that. You would calibrate your monitor to the printer to make sure that what you see is what you get. Some of you have experienced this when you have something that looks great on the monitor and then you go to print it and it looks terrible. Well, part of that could be the fact that the printer's terrible. But the other part of that is that these color spaces aren't aligned and your profiles aren't aligned. So I want to introduce the concept, and as you go forward, you may be able to take it to the next level with some calibration. So color theory. We've talked about color, color space. Color theory is that, generally speaking, there is meaning behind colors. There's a reason that you might choose one color over another color. So we're going to explore what those are, and hopefully at the end you're going to be able to be deliberate about choosing what color you're going to make something, as opposed to just saying, oh, this is what my daughter would say. She's 8. I like pink, so we're going to make it pink. Or I like turquoise, so we're going to make it turquoise. You guys, hopefully, will spend a little bit more time deliberating over what your color should be, and then using that color to its advantage. I will also put in the caveat here that today when I lecture, I'll make it seem like color theory is the absolute most important thing in the world. It's not. Even if red is symbolic of anger, and you don't use red as a symbolic anger use, you just like red, and you want red to show up on your drawing, that's okay. It's not an end-all thing. But it's nice to know, because sometimes if you can align it, it can actually make a difference. So color theory at its core is about developing aesthetically pleasing color relationships. So it's thinking about color and then working with color such that you're actively producing something that looks good. Color systems generally have some kind of an emotion associated with them. There are specific color groups that are associated with generally a specific emotion. And so we'll talk about those. There are warm colors, there are cool colors, and there are neutral colors. So our warm colors are generally our reds, our yellows, and our oranges. I think they're called warm colors because they're very similar to like fire. If you look at a fire, generally you're going to see those colors. Okay? So they're warm colors. They're often associated with feelings of happiness or joy. In fact, sometimes web designers or graphic designers will shift to using certain colors to try to make you more excited about things. And we'll explore that a little bit later on in this lecture. So those are the warm colors. Cool colors are the blues, the greens, and the purples. Think like cold winter ice, that sort of thing. They're often used in professional designs and emphasize authority or stability. So something that's going to be around for a while. The neutral colors are those colors that are in between. The grays, the browns, the blacks, the whites. Now, of course, we could have a warm gray or a cool gray within the gray family. So they're still neutral, but we could lean slightly in the warm gray direction or slightly in the cool gray. In the grays, for example, when I talk about a cool gray, it just has more blue in it. A warm gray is going to have more yellow in it. And so depending on what you're trying to do, you might lean in that direction. So let's talk about colors specifically. And we'll go through the primary and secondary colors. Okay? So we'll start with red first. Red is generally symbolic of fire and or power. It's associated with passion and importance. So if you keep that in the back of your mind, it may help inform the use of red. Stimulates energy and excitement towards something. The negative flip side of this, all the colors have a flip side. The flip side of this one is that it's used as a color for anger, color for emergency. There's a reason that fire engines are painted red, for example. Rage, potentially. Interestingly enough, this is a side note about color, but sometimes stories are fun, right? So you guys, a lot of you will end up going to Berkeley. Okay? Berkeley has a big rival, certainly in the sports arena, and that rival is Stanford. Okay? So Berkeley, the city of Berkeley, has a fire department, no surprise, just like all the other fire departments. They had red engines. Makes sense, right? Fire engines are red, generally speaking. There's a big enough rivalry between Cal and Stanford, Cal's color being blue and gold, Stanford being red and white, to where when it got to around game time, it was actually kind of dangerous for the fire departments to have red engines because the students didn't like the red engines. I know this sounds really silly. So Berkeley actually for a while changed their fire department engines to be blue to combat this. They since went back to white, and then they eventually went back to red. And now people don't really care as much. There was a period of time, I would say, kind of from the mid-'80s through the late '90s, where sports were a really big deal. And it's kind of tailed off now, so it's not as important. The rivalry is not as big. But it's kind of an interesting story, nonetheless. Orange. Orange is generally associated with happiness, joy, or sunshine. It's a pretty happy color. Not quite as happy as yellow. We'll get to that in a second. Evokes childlike exuberance. It's still somewhat of an aggressive color. You could still use it for caution, though typically we're going to err more on yellow or red for that. It can also be symbolic of ignorance. Yellow is the happy color. So if you asked my son, who's 5, to draw a picture of a house, he would draw the picture of the house, and guess what? Up in the corner, he'd put a nice yellow sun. You did this when you were that age too. It's a happy color. Generally, the sun is going to be yellow. Energy, brightness, optimism, happiness, joy, all of those kinds of things. Negative feelings would include caution, criticism, laziness, jealousy. Caution tape is yellow. Right? If we want to emphasize something, a while back, all the grates outside on the courtyards, they came out and they sprayed around all of them in yellow to make you see where the grates were. They've since been covered up with dirt and you can't even see them anymore. But when they did it, it really stood out. So it definitely draws attention. Green. Green is generally symbolic of nature, no surprise. Healing quality, growth, harmony. It's also symbolic of money. So frequently, finance-related websites are going to have green. They're going to be green. Finance companies generally have some green. So it's symbolic of money, but it's also symbolic of growth. I think it's really interesting because green has evolved from being just a color to being like a whole social movement about you want to be green. You want to be more environmentally conscious. So the color itself has kind of evolved to be more than just the color. It can show greed or jealousy. That's kind of the flip side of the money side of it. Can be used for a beginner or for somebody with a lack of experience. You're green, you're new to something. Blue. Blue is generally the peaceful, calming, stable color. So it's a bit on the cool side, but it's often used by companies to kind of say, hey, we're here, we're established, we're somebody you can trust. The White House website uses a lot of blue. Symbolic of trust, dependability. Negative, symbolic of depression, potentially. Coldness, passiveness, detachedness. Okay, so I had to do this. I actually have two versions of this. This one's a little old. This was the White House website when Obama was in. And so here we have just kind of the home page. Okay, it doesn't really matter what it says. Big blue banner, stability. If this was switched to being red, all I did was change all the rest of the colors are the same on the website, but the blue is switched to red. Feels a little different, right? It's just a little different. So this is that association with color. We feel slightly different. We might not even recognize that we feel different, but you as a designer have the ability to choose how somebody's going to feel because of these color choices. So fast forward, this is the new website, newer website. Same thing, a lot of blue. What happens if we take that blue and we switch it to red? It feels different, and it looks different. So it's definitely something to be aware of going forward. Purple. Purple is generally the color of royalty or sophistication. The reason it was the color of royalty is back when you had clothing that had to be dyed, purple dye was the most expensive dye. So you could only afford it if you were rich. Therefore, it became this symbolic of royalty color. It's still kind of there, symbolic of luxury or wealth, etc. Spirituality associated with healing and or feminine qualities. Negative could be a little gloomy, maybe a little sad. Black, correlated with power, elegance, sophistication, and depth. I find it so amusing that architects love to wear black. We always love to wear black. Of course, I'm not wearing black today, but we do. This is one of those things you will start to chuckle at if you start to pay attention to. You have your review. All the visiting architects that walk in to give you your review, they're all going to be wearing black. You're in grad school. Everybody wears black all the time. So somehow we think that we have more power if we wear black, I guess. But it's become a cultural thing. It could be associated with death, mystery, or the unknown. It's the color of grief, mourning, and sorrow. So we use it in the world of architecture for power or whatever, but it's also the color of grief. If you were grieving for somebody, you'd be wearing black as well. White, purity and innocence. Cleanliness, maybe safety. Can also be cold and distant. So it's kind of the lack of all other colors. So how about this? Research reveals that all human beings make an unconscious judgment about a person, an environment, or an item within 90 seconds of initial viewing. And that between 62 and 90% of that judgment or that assessment is based on color alone. Kind of interesting. So if you looked at something for the first time, you would have an initial reaction to it within 90 seconds, and that initial reaction is almost entirely based on color. Interesting. So you as a designer have a lot of power because you get to choose what color something is. This is kind of fun. We're familiar with brands. We just talked all about logos last class. You guys designed your logos. Perhaps you want to change the color of your logo, having talked about things. But this is a bunch of our brands that we see on an everyday basis. And it's kind of interesting to see where those brands fall in the color spectrum. And we're used to seeing it. You know, excitement, youthful, bold. Kmart. I don't know. You know, they are going out of business. Anyway, but it's interesting. It's certainly interesting to see where people choose to peg their particular branding. CNN. Right? We have some, CNN, excitement, we have some, like NBC or Google, that are all-encompassing. We do everything. So let's go ahead and put us in the all-color category. And then we have the opposite. I love this. Microsoft, all colors. Apple, no colors. Distinct opposites of each other. So it's interesting nonetheless to see. I mean, you can pick on any of this stuff. The color of royalty and sophistication. Taco Bell. So the point is that they don't always fall. But some of the other ones, you know, Dell, AT&T being blue, stable, long-term companies. Okay, that kind of makes sense. IBM, etc. So let's look at some case studies. I hope these are fun for you. Yahoo, 1996. Some of you weren't even born. That's scary. Right? I remember Yahoo in 1996. So let's take a look at the color. So remember, in 1996, the internet was like dial-up, and it was a new thing. It was kind of exciting. Wow, I have access to online. This is so cool. So Yahoo, internet company, internet-based company, logo is red. Excitement. This is something new. Check us out. Now, all the links are blue. I don't think that has anything to do with stable. It has to do with the fact that links were blue in that day and age. It was how the programming language worked, how HTML worked. So it's just kind of interesting to see. Let's jump forward. Maybe. Maybe not. Oh, don't tell me I lost connection again. This is going to kill me. Hold on a second. See if I can reconnect here. Nope, it doesn't like me. Okay, we'll do it the old-fashioned way. Got to go back a little bit. Okay, so 2000. Again, some of you probably weren't even born yet. So 2000, the idea of buying something online was kind of an innovative thing. You know, before that, you had to watch like QVC on TV if you wanted to order something, or pick up a catalog and look for something and order it. People didn't order things to be shipped to there. So Yahoo, again, red logo, Yahoo, were new and exciting. A lot of green on the screen, emphasizing, hey, you can buy some stuff. Symbolic of money. Yahoo Shopping, big bar. Fast forward, 2003, right? Yahoo's starting to get a little crowded in their page structure. So we're seeing the first introduction here of some purple. So still the red Yahoo logo, but there's a little bit of purple trickling in. 2005, a little bit more purple. Sometimes colors are associated with certain times of year. This one is a February, so there's a bunch of Valentine's Day stuff. Kind of that pinkish red color. So you're going to get a little bit of that as you go forward. So we're still in 2005. 2007, hey, we want to rebrand ourselves to be more like Google because Google's really successful and we're really not. So let's change. So we stripped down the page. Still the red logo. Nah, we didn't really like that. We're going to go back to the traditional Yahoo. So in 2009, we switched to, like I have any say in this, Yahoo switches to purple. The logo is no longer red, it's now purple. There's a lot more purple on the page. Hey, we're a luxury brand. You should have your email through us. We're established. It's interesting that they chose to make that switch from red. Forward, 2013, the purple gets a little bit darker. I had to pick this one because the rare sea creature found off the coast of California. Sorry, it's just, I find it amusing. A lot more purple on the page, though. So we're seeing that influx of purple, and it's a little bit darker purple. 2016, a little bit darker purple still. 2017, they thinned out the logo quite a lot. Well, I guess it was 2016 they had it. Okay. There we go. 2017, 18, and then 19, they went back to a lighter purple. And they changed the logo up a little bit. I had to pull, I think that was special because it was in March. For March Madness, they had the basketball in there. And then we go to current. Interesting to see that progression from 1996, especially when you relate it to color. So I couldn't resist. I had to do another one. Apple, 1997. A lot of red on the page. Interesting. You know, we're exciting. Pre-order Mac OS 8. Sweet. So this was right before Apple was about to die. So Apple was really close to going under, and then Steve Jobs came back and said, we need to rebrand everything. And so when that rebrand happened in 1998, this is what we saw from a web page. And it's kind of interesting to see the computers that are offered here and how they've evolved. They're the classic. So it's still interesting when you look at it. May 8th, 1998, we're seeing a big strip down of color. Not a lot of color on the page. And this is going to be thematically critical to Apple going forward. Okay? So let's go forward. 2000. Emphasizing that eMac, I think that's what it was called at the time. Or maybe it was an iMac, I don't remember. Anyway, July 6th, 2000. Remember, Apple was trying to rebrand itself. They went from being almost belly up to being a new innovator trying to create something different. One of the colors that was available was purple. Remember, I think it was purple, turquoise, and like orange were the three colors that this computer came in. So the one that Apple chooses to put on the home page is the purple one. Remember, purple is symbolic of luxury. This is more expensive, but look at how cool it looks. It's a luxury item now. Interesting. We go forward to 2001. Apple logo turns blue. Hey, we survived our belly up. Now that we survived that, we're starting to be a stable company. We can go ahead and switch our logo to blue because we're stable. And so we see a lot of blue on the page here. I love Adobe Illustrator 10. I also love that Star Wars Episode 2 is emphasized on the page in 2001. 2002. Check out that laptop. 1 gigahertz. Yeah, baby. Again, a lot of blue on the page still. The Apple logo switched to gray, which is going to be an ongoing trend. 2004, the iPod came into effect. Big, big deal. Huge consumer device, but also branded as a luxury item. So we see a lot of purple on that homepage. Some of you might remember these commercials. And I think one of the things that Apple was distinctly brilliant at doing was they made their headphones white. Before then, all the headphones were black. And Apple changed their headphones to be white, and it was something that you knew if somebody had an iPod because they had white headphones. It was a really good branding thing. It's kind of like at the bottom of your phone when you had one of the first iPhones, it always said, "Sent from my iPhone." It was a branding thing. Nobody cares that it was sent with your iPhone, but it was a way of them saying, hey, guess what? I have an iPhone. Great advertising. So we go forward, 2006. No color on the page whatsoever. All black, color of sophistication. And we're going to see this trend. A little bit of fade, a little bit of three-dimensional depth to the top bar. A little bit of shine on the Apple logo. Still a little bit of shine on the Apple logo. It's amazing that's what the phones used to look like. We lose track of these over time. Right? A lot of shine on that top in 2011. 2013, see there's a consistency to this. So September 18th, 2013, this was actually a big deal from a design perspective. I know it's starting to seem like ancient history. Johnny Ives, the head designer at Apple, changed iOS from being shiny to having a flat UI. So everything was flat. We didn't have the shine and the three-dimensional depth anymore. That was a big shift. As soon as he and Apple did that, everybody else did it. Nobody else would do it before somebody big like Apple did it. So it was a big shift in the design process, and that changed. Interestingly enough, in 2014, the top bar still hadn't changed. The web designers hadn't synced up just yet. I think this is interesting because it's the only Apple page that's ever had a lot of color on it. This year, they were pushing the photo thing. I think it was with the iPhone 5 because they finally had a good camera in the iPhone. And as a result, they pushed the photo thing. We will see it go right back to black and white from then on. So it's kind of interesting. This was kind of the outlier in there. Top bar becomes completely flat, no shadows, no shine. Again, a fair amount of color on the page, but the Apple part of it is very plain. We've moved all the way to black, very dark gray, almost black going forward. There we are in 2017. Screen turning almost black. You can see this trend, right? This one in 2019, this was in the spring. That was they had converted back to white, and then the most recent one, they're back to black. So it's still consistent. So it's kind of interesting to look at these websites over time. So more information about color theory, Palatin, Colored. We're going to use both of those today in the lab portion of the class. Color Lovers is another one. If you want to go back and look at old websites, which is, I warn you ahead of time, it's a total rat hole. Like you can spend hours doing this, pulling up websites. This morning I pulled up DVC circa 1996. It was really funny. So you can go back and you can do it. It's archive.org/web. They have snapshots of the web over time. It's pretty entertaining, and that's where a lot of these slides came from. So let's talk about Charlie Harper. This is your next assignment and what you're going to be doing. I'm going to show you a bunch of sample images and talk about what's effective about the Charlie Harper. Charlie Harper was an illustrator in the 50s and 60s. He did a lot of illustration work revolving around animals, birds, plants, fish, etc. And all of his designs are fundamentally flat. So they've been flattened out and they're built up with layers. So this is a perfect example of how Illustrator can work for us. So in this we have our distillation of the bird into a very simple shape. So we have the two birds here, the two cardinals. We're looking at them. They're circles. They have the little triangle top for the top feathers. And then they have their tail and their wings are larger circles. Those circles form a great diagonal composition as part of this. So the techniques of composition that we talked about in the photography section of the class still apply. So all this stuff builds on itself. But the shapes are always very simplified. So there's no three-dimensionality. It's always a simple repeating shape pattern. So here we have all the turkey vultures in one direction and then the last one flips. So it's a very simple organization, but it works nicely from a composition standpoint. If something moves, like the hummingbird wings, he frequently does them as outlines. So we just do several outlines that are overlapping. I apologize, some of these are blurry. This is about as close to three-dimensional as he gets. It's still very flattened, though. And I think that's the one thing I want to caution you when you're creating these animals. So I think this is a particularly good one because of the layering. So we're looking down at a pond, and as we look down at it, we have the leaf that's sitting on the surface of the water. That's the topmost layer. Then we have the concentric rings that represent the little ripples on the pool. Below that, we have the lily pads. Right? Below that, we have the fish. Below that, we have the little crawdad hanging out at the bottom. So we've worked our way down a whole series of layers. There's actually more layers. The dragonfly's up top, even further. But you guys get the idea. Where it slices, there's no three-dimensional bit to it. It's just slices of overlapping. Oops. Sorry, I skipped one. So this raccoon one, remember this one, because we're going to come back, because I'm going to show you an adaptation. That's totally blurry, sorry. So let's look at some student work. So what I'm going to ask you to do as part of your exercise today is I'm going to ask you to go find an example Charlie Harper image and then base your work on that example. And I used to not have students find examples and you just, hey, create something based on Charlie Harper. And what always happened is people would go find a photograph and they'd end up doing something that was too three-dimensional. Like, this is very much about flattening it out, basic shapes, overlapping of shapes, etc. And so I've found over time that asking you to go find an example Charlie Harper will help steer you in the right direction when you create yours. So you should be creating your own, but you can base it on one of the Charlie Harper pieces. So all of these are student examples, but they fall in the same category of Charlie Harper. They look and feel like a Charlie Harper design. So you see the repetition. Some of these are very close. Charlie Harper did one very similar to this, where the baboons, the last one was scratching. This one, the student added the little knife. So there's little variations that you can do. Right? This one could have been one of Charlie Harper's. I always found this one very compelling. It's subtle and a little bit different, but it's in the same vein as a Charlie Harper. So remember I talked to you about those raccoons, to remember those raccoons. In this particular example, the student took the raccoons and they tweaked it. They changed it. They added the barbecue. So it's the same basic idea, but they made it their own. Do you guys see how that plays out? concentric circles here. Obviously, the flamingo's neck can't do that many S turns, but it's a compelling composition. Okay, so on we're going to continue. You guys are going to be responsible for part 1. We already talked about the Charlie Harper sample. I'll let you do that. I'm going to walk you through part 2, part 3, and part 4 about your color swatches. And then I would encourage you to use the rest of the time to get yourself caught up on your assignments and or start Charlie Harper and actually working on that. So you got a little bit of extra time today to get caught up. So first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to open up my browser here, and I'm going to go to a website called Paladin.com. And there's a link in the course website if you go to today's exercise here. There we are. There's a link to the website, so you can click on it if you want, or you can go to Paladin directly here. And now this one is a pretty good way of kind of thinking about colors and working with it. What we see on the screen is our basic color wheel, just like I was talking about earlier. And we can shift our color through the color wheel. And you can see that what I'm getting is I'm getting a primary color. So let's pick blue, for example. That's more purple, a little more blue here. I'm getting a primary color, and then I'm getting a darker and lighter version of that color. So I'm ending up with 5 colors that are in the same spot on the color wheel going from light to dark. So I can spin this around to get any color that I want. I can also change the light and the darks. I can go all the way out to get black, or I can come in to get lighter or darker versions of the color. And you guys can see that change as you go forward. All right? So those would be kind of analogous colors to each other. So we're doing similar but light and dark. If we come up here to the top, we can switch. So in this scenario, we're switching to adjacent colors. So in this scenario, we'd be getting a primary color and 2 analogous colors to it. And you can see that as I swing around, I get my primary color of red, and then I get 2 analogous colors to it, 2 colors that are close by. I can change how close and how far apart these are. Likewise, I can change, just like I did before, how dark or how light my variants are. If we come over to the next option here, we have what's called a split complementary. In this case, it's a triad. They call it a triad, where I have one primary color, and then instead of choosing a direct complement to that primary color, I'm splitting it. So I end up with 2 complements to it that are close. And so in this scenario, if my primary color was this turquoise, I end up with a red and kind of a brownish yellow as my 2 complements to it. Last option here, they call it the tetrad. It's an analogous color and its complement. So in this scenario, if I were to pull this around, say to turquoise, well, let's go to green here, right? My complement of green would be red, so they're directly across. And my analogous color to green would be this blue, and its complement would be this kind of goldish color. There is also an option to create your own freestyle 4 colors. I would stay away from that for right now. I'm going to use the split complementary, and I'm going to pick a primary color. Maybe it'll be that one, where I have kind of a purple color, and then I have a green, a lime green, and kind of a gold that go with it in terms of split complementary. So once I've decided on 3 colors that I like, I need to go over and find a way to save these colors. And so first off, I could hover over these colors, and I could write down the hexadecimal values of the colors. This is a way of repeating colors. So for example, this purple color is 452F74. If I were to open up Illustrator, let me just create a new blank page here. There we go. And I went into my color picker. And right down here where that hashtag is, if I went 452F24, was that it? No. I can't remember. 452F74. 452F74. 452 F74. There's the color. So I could create my colors that way. It's a whole lot of work to do it that way and to write them down, though it is something that you could establish. The alternative to that is to come down here to the right where it says Tables and Export. And when I click on Tables and Export, it gives me the primary color and the two secondary colors. It gives me the hexadecimal values. It gives me the RGB values, so I could type it in by RGB. But I can also, let's see here, click on Color Swatches, and they let me download an ACO Photoshop swatch table. So it would be great if they let me download an Illustrator swatch table, but they don't from this particular website. And again, it's going to depend on the website, depending on how you're going to work with this. So I'm going to go ahead and download these swatches in this ACO Photoshop format. So I'll click on it, and it'll let me download it. It's mypalette.aco. It downloaded to my downloads folder. So remember, this is a Photoshop file, so I'm going to need to work in Photoshop first. So we'll go ahead and open up Photoshop. Let me cancel this for a second. Perfect. I don't think I even have to create a document. I can go to Edit and then Presets, Preset Manager. So I'm not even creating a brand new document. I just opened up Photoshop and I went to Edit, Presets, Preset Manager. Everything that I'm talking about, by the way, there's links to the tutorials that walk through this. So Photoshop 1.23 here walks through exactly what I'm doing right now. So if you get lost, know that that's there. So let me go back to Photoshop here. And I went again to Edit and then Presets and then Preset Manager. And when I open up the Preset Manager here, I need to go from preset type brushes, I need to switch to preset type swatches. So there we go. So what a swatch is in Photoshop, in Illustrator, and in InDesign is essentially a way of saving your colors such that you could reuse them over and over again without having to type in the values or write down the values. So once you have a specific set of colors, let's say in your portfolio, these are the colors that I'm going to use. I can always go back and make sure that my red is always the same red, my blue is always the same blue, etc. So it's a way of preserving and saving colors. In Photoshop and in Illustrator and in InDesign, there are default swatch sets that open to begin with. And so the swatches that we see here are already the ones that come by default in Photoshop. So we want to bring in those new ones that I just downloaded. So I'll go ahead and I'll click on the Load button here. And I'll go to my Downloads folder, which is where it went. And there's my mypalette.aco. And I'll go ahead and click on Load. And so what it did is it started at the very end. So my last swatch that was default in Photoshop was this dark warm brown. It started right here with this purple, and it loaded this whole group of colors. There's 15 total colors that it loaded for me. I'm going to hold down the Shift key on the keyboard, and I'll click the last color, like that. So I've essentially selected all of these colors that came with my swatch when I opened it. Once I have all of those selected, I want to save those in a format that will let me open it in Photoshop, will let me open it in InDesign, and will let me open it in Illustrator. So universal format. It would be really nice if the Palatine website just let us download the universal format instead of having to go through these extra steps. But they don't, so we work around it. So once I have these colors selected, the logical thing would be to go to Save Set. The problem is this just saves a Photoshop swatch set again. So instead, we have to go to this gear icon up here at the top, right there. I'll click on that, and we'll choose Save Swatches for Exchange. That's how we get to the file that will go between Photoshop, InDesign, and Illustrator. So I'm going to save Swatches for Exchange, and we could save it into today's folder this time. All right. And when I click Save, it's going to save it as a .ase, an Adobe Swatch Exchange file. So I'll go ahead and click on Save. Because that's a Swatch Exchange file, I could load it into Photoshop, but I can also load it into InDesign, and I can also load it into Illustrator. So it's a very universal format, which is a great way to have it. So I'll go ahead and click Done. I don't need to do anything more in Photoshop, and it's now time to go back to Illustrator. Now, to prove that it works, I have some example files that you can download right here under Part 4. Depending on how many swatches you have, so in my case I have 15, you can download one of these sample files. So in my case, like I said, I have 15 colors, so I'll click on the 15 color sample file. You could, of course, create this yourself. I just did it for you to save you a little bit of time. And so when I open that up in Illustrator, what it is it's a bunch of rectangles that I can then apply my swatches to prove that it works. So first thing I need to do is open up the swatches window. I'm going to go to Window and then choose Swatches. And like I said before with Photoshop, there's always some default swatches that come loaded. Everything that you see here are the default swatches. It's time to load in another set of swatches. So I'll click on this little set of lines in the upper right corner and say Open Swatch Library, Other Library. Now I can go and find the one that I just saved. So I'll go to my flash drive, and we'll go to today's folder, and there's that Swatch Exchange file, and I'll go ahead and open it. When I do that, it opens it up right here in its own little window and lets me see all of those colors. At this point, it's a matter of clicking on each of these individual rectangles. Now this first set looks like I left them as a group. So I'll right-click and say Ungroup so that I can select them individually. Alternatively, you could use the white select to select just individuals without having to ungroup it. Either way. So I'll click on the first square, I'll come over to my swatches, and I'll click on the first color. I'll click on the second rectangle, second color. Third rectangle, third color. And essentially, this is proving that my swatches are working. So we'll go through the next set. And then we'll go into the last set here. Like that. So you can see how these were then able to apply. So I have the saved swatch set, and I was able to use them. I had to do that conversion through Photoshop, but now I can go back and I can load these swatches into Illustrator. So this is great. You can create your color palette using Paleton. There are other websites that sometimes are useful, one of which is a website called Colored. It's C-O-L-R-D. They eliminated a few of those vowels in there. And with this website, it's a little bit different because you can actually choose, if it works, to upload an image and then extract a color palette from a particular image. So I could click on this. They have some samples here, but you can also open your own image. Let's see, upload here. And let's see here. I'm going back to one of my sample images. Let's do that one. And it will then look at the image and it will pick several sample colors, either 3, 5, or 7 sample colors from your image. It's kind of an interesting way of creating a sample set. In this particular example, once you have your set saved and you click on Save, you can choose to download it directly to Illustrator. You can go to Photoshop, either way. So that's nice because it gives us an Illustrator file to load of swatches instead. These are not Swatch Exchange files, so they are still specific to either Illustrator or to Photoshop. For illustration purposes, let me go ahead and download the Illustrator colors. There it is. It's downloading as an AI. In this scenario, I had 5 swatches, so let me go ahead and download the sample with 5 colors. There it is. Same basic thing set up here, just different rectangles. And I'll go back in and I'll load the swatches the same way. So I open the swatches window, I click on the 3 little lines in the upper right corner, open swatch library, other library. And this was in my downloads, and it was this one. And when I click open, there it is. It loads up those colors. Same thing where I click on the first one, click on the second one, third, fourth, and fifth. Same basic strategy here. So these all loaded directly in Illustrator. If I wanted them to be universal and to go between, I can again select all of them. So I held down Shift, selected all of them. I can click this little menu and I can say, I thought I could save them. I might have to put them in my swatch library here first. There we go. And let me see if I can then sort them. There we go. Save swatch library as ASE. That would get me to the universal format that I could go back and forth. Okay, so that's essentially how we are going to work with swatches in Illustrator and or in Photoshop. So I have a few other things that I've saved on the course website for you, and I want to point them out now. If you go to Resources and then Swatches, I have some swatch sets that may be useful to you. So when I was in school, I really liked the Prismacolor markers. And different people have different preferences when it comes to markers and whatever. I like the Prismacolors. I worked a lot with the Prismacolors. I have an extensive collection of Prismacolor markers. So I wanted to have the digital equivalent of my Prismacolor markers so that I could use those digitally as well as manually on an actual piece of paper. So I have here Prismacolor sets for all the various sets of Prismacolors. Some of these sets they don't sell anymore. Some of them they still do sell. They've kind of changed them. For a while there was an architectural color set that you could buy. There was a landscape color set. There's a warm gray, a French gray, and a cool gray. On any one of these, so I'll go ahead and download the architectural color set here. Let me show it in its download folder here. And let me go ahead and extract these. There we go. Inside of this, I have a variety of things for us. I have an ASE file. That's that swatch exchange file. I have an Illustrator specific swatch. The difference between the ASE is the colors themselves. So it's just the straight up color. The Illustrator specific is actually a texture pattern that will color in your particular piece. Let's see if I can open one of these so you can see it. Yeah, you can see it, where it has some streaks built into it. You guys see those little streaks on the screen? So if you had something in Illustrator, you outlined it, and you filled it with this, it would have streaks as if you colored it by hand. So you can create that effect digitally. So all of these are available for you guys to download. You work with them the same way. So over here in Illustrator, I would go ahead and open that swatch library. So I'd click the little flyout here. I'd go to Open Swatch Library, Other Library. Let me go to, well, it was in my Downloads folder. Right, the Swatch Exchange color set, this one, is just the colors themselves. So there's all the colors. So just for illustration purposes, I could pick any one of these colors, and these would match up with the colors that are the markers themselves. Or I could load in the ones with the texture. So let me go ahead and go to Open Swatch Library, Other Library. It was in Downloads. And this would be the Adobe Illustrator file, specific for Illustrator. And there we go. There's the architectural color set. These ones have the streaks in them. Part 5, I'm asking you guys to create your color palette for Charlie Harper. So think about what your colors should be for Charlie Harper and how they go together based on the stuff that we talked today. And then work on your actual Charlie Harper. We'll do a little bit more work next class that will help you fill in. So even if you just did all the outlines today, that's a good place to start. And then we'll talk about filling in the color next class. Next class, we're going to talk about diagrams and how you diagram in Illustrator, which will cover brushes and live paints and that sort of thing in Illustrator going forward.